Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to chat with people that I've connected with in the entertainment world over the years, most of whom are all just a little bit more famous than I am. And today, I'm very pleased to have with me singer and radio personality, Robbie Lane. Welcome to the show, Robbie.
Thank you, Tommy. I don't know about whether I'm more popular than you. We'll just have to battle about that.
Yeah, well, it's the general theme, and there's no real gauge to go by other than record sales, and you may have sold a few more than I have. Anyway, a lot of people are aware of your career over the years on TV and now on radio, but there were things that happened in your life that obviously got you into the music. What can you tell us about the early years, Robbie?
When I was in public school, I joined a band as a drummer, and I had never drummed in my life prior to that, so obviously that didn't work. And then I suggested that I could sing, and I had been singing in choirs, all the usual stuff that kids do in school. So that was my first band. It was like a neighborhood band, and we played our own public school and church dances, things like that. And as years went on, the name changed, became Robbie Lane and the Disciples, and we were pretty much working on a steady basis every weekend because we were all still in school. And one summer, well, actually it was spring, we used to go down to the Concord Tavern where Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks would do several weeks in a row quite often. And on Saturday afternoons, they had a matinee. And you could, if you were underage, you could go because there was a dining room side. So as long as you ordered some food and pop, you're okay. And I didn't know this, but one afternoon while we were there, someone that knew me went to the Hawk, Ronnie, and said, there's this guy here, and he can really sing, and why don't you get him up as a guest? Well, Ronnie was hungover, as usual, so any excuse to get anybody else up on stage was just fine with him. So up I went, and it was Robbie Robertson and Garth Hudson and Rick Danko, Richard Manuel, Levon. So the regular, and Jerry Penfound, who was with the Hawks for quite a while, playing sax and flute and other instruments. So I got up and I did a couple songs, blues songs, and it was just a real, for me, that was one of the most exciting things that had happened in my life up until that point. And afterwards, Ronnie came over to meet me, and I was sitting with most of the guys in my band, and he said, oh, you got the whole band here? I said, yeah. He said, why don't you come down next week, and we'll get the whole band up. That happened. And after that, he called me and said, the Hawks are leaving, I don't know when, but I'm at the Cock Door on Yonge Street playing 6 nights a week. There's a room downstairs that's licensed, and I'd like to put you in there on weekends, and then I could come down on my breaks and do a couple songs with you guys and kind of get you warmed up for the eventual leaving of the Hawks. So that's exactly what happened. And within the end of that summer, the Hawks were gone, and we moved up to the main floor and stayed there for a year and a half with Ronnie. And he wanted us to be the Hawks, and I said no. I don't know where I got the guts to say no, but I did. And I said, no, we want to keep our name. So it was Ronnie Hawkins with Robbie Lane and the Disciples. And we were there for a year and a half.
Very cool. Now, was that before or after the Music Hop on CBC TV?
It was during, because I had auditioned for Music Hop probably around the time in the spring of that year, or maybe the year before. Anyway, I had done a couple of appearances on Music Hop up until that point, and during the time that we were at the Cock Door with Ronnie, I did several.
Right. Now, recently I saw a post from you on Facebook where you were talking about being introduced by Alex Trebek.
Yes. He was the host at that time of Music Hop, and he stayed there for quite a while. And it was just, when you went there, it was a live show, so if you made a mistake, too bad. It was on the air, and there's nothing you could do about it. But he was such a really affable, kind, not a music guy at all, really. But he tried his best, and he did a very good job. They had a great house band, and so every time I went and did a couple of songs with them, it was just easy. It was nice, and that's how I got to know some of the television producers who would later play a bigger part in my life.
Right. Now, was it through your work on TV that you signed your first record deal, or how did that happen?
That happened while we were at Lecoq Tour with Ronnie, and Ronnie had decided to start a record label, Hawk Records, and he used us as his studio band, and then we recorded probably a dozen songs during that time and released three. The fourth never was released, but we released 3 singles during that time. The first 2 charted on 1050 Chum and some other stations in Southern Ontario. He didn't have a distribution deal, so Hawk Records, literally, the guy who was putting the records in the record stores was driving Ronnie's station wagon and going from town to town and trying to get record stores to stock the records. So it wasn't a widespread release. It was mainly Southern Ontario. We did get play in some of the major markets like London and Windsor and Ottawa, Toronto, and other cities. So through those records, we were able to spread our wings a little bit when the time came and travel to these places and do some gigs.
Right. Now, I understand that one of those singles, What Am I Gonna Do, reached number 10 in 1966. Was that on the Billboard chart, or?
That was RPM. By that time, we had left Hawkins and we'd signed with Capitol Records. So that was from an album that we did with Capitol, and of the, I think, 13 songs on that album, 4 or 5 were released as singles, and What Am I Gonna Do was the most successful of those.
And then you also had a fairly successful hit with Soul Deep.
Yeah, that was a weird kind of thing. I was lucky to go to Nashville in the, I'm going to say, the late 1960s, and I was contacted by a producer in Nashville. His name's Jim Malloy, and Jim had produced Elvis and major artists, so why the hell he ever called me, I don't know. But he did, and he sent me 15 or 20 songs that their publishing company owned. He said, just pick, 10 and learn them, and then we're going to fly you down here and we're going to record you. So there I went to Nashville, and eventually, and recorded at the RCA studios, and Soul Deep was one of the songs, but the writer of that song had an agreement that he was ready to put in front of me, saying, if you don't get an American record deal on this song, this single, within a year, then I'm taking back the song and I'm going to give it to somebody else and you won't be able to release it. And I thought, well, that's fair. He wants to make a living like everybody else. So at the end of that year, 2 months later, I was lying on a beach in Southern Ontario with a radio with me, and I heard the Box Tops version of Soul Deep. So he had given it to the Box Tops, and theirs was really good. Ours was a little less rocky and more poppy, so theirs was a good version. But I always liked the song. It was just one of those that we all thought was going to be a good one, and it was for the Box Tops, not me.
Yeah, who knows what's going to happen once you've recorded a song. I talk to a lot of people in the business, and usually what happens is that you get the deal, and then either management or the record company doesn't really go all in, and they'll put all the money on Peter Frampton and Fleetwood Mac, and there you are, on the road to Timmins or someplace.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I understand that at one point in time you were recording some Dolly Parton songs.
That was in Nashville.
Yeah, at the RCA studio there. And is it true that Dolly was actually in the room while you did that?
Yes. And they warned me ahead of time. The producer and the engineer said, she's coming in. We don't know what time, but she's coming in. But you'll recognize her immediately, especially it's a side view. And I was in a booth, and all the musicians, it was all live off the floor, all the musicians were in the big room, and there was the production studio where Jim was and the engineer. And while I was doing one of her songs, she walked in, And she just turned and smiled and waved and stood around and listened for a little while and then waited until I was finished that song and came in to say hello to me. And because, just like everybody knows, Dolly Parton's just one of those people who's very friendly and very welcoming. And it wouldn't matter. Could have been the worst rendition of the song in the world, and she would have been nice about it. That's the kind of person she is.
Well, everybody knows about her huge personality and her awesome singing voice, but not a lot of people are aware of just how much of a prolific songwriter she is.
Oh, amazing! If you really look it up, and you can, it's shocking how many hits she wrote that other people recorded, and we would never have known, had we not looked at the label, that it was a Dolly Parton song. She's one of an amazing writer.
Yeah, and that's where the money is.
Yeah, for sure.
So around mid-'60s, you were on CTV. Was it first A Go-Go 66?
Yeah, it was a nighttime rock and roll pop show that Stan Jacobson, who was the producer at CBC for Music Hop, he's the one that came up with the idea. And he approached CBC and they said, no, we don't want to do a primetime rock and roll show. So he went to the Young Network, CTV, and they said, yeah. So he produced the show for the first year. It was called Go-Go 66, and it was a national show. And then after that year, we were renewed for 3 more years under the name It's Happening. They changed the name.
Okay. That's the story. And I know that you have really never stopped playing your live shows until COVID. But at a certain point in time, you switched over from TV to radio. How did that happen?
I've always been a radio geek. I've always loved radio. From the time 1050 Chub went on the air here in Toronto, I was a radio guy. I had radios with me everywhere. And so even though I'd done some television and done some recording, I really wanted to do radio. And how it happened was I was playing a Sunday afternoon gig as a house band at a club in Toronto. And they were having problems with their Friday nights. They weren't doing a lot of business. Every other night was pretty good. And I said to them, well, why don't you think about doing an oldies dance and bring in Chum, who had gone oldies by then, as a sponsor. You'll have to buy airtime, of course, but they'll send somebody over from the station, and he'll spin the records, and they'll have contests, and who knows, maybe it'll work. So, long story short, they both Chum and the club agreed, and they invited me to the signing of the contract because they had to buy a lot of airtime. And the club owner said, there's only one stipulation. I want Robbie to voice the ads. And I had done a little bit of voiceover work, but not much. And so that was fine. I thought that was, very nice of him to want me to do it. And I did. And so Chum was running these ads. And within a few months, the program director contacted me and said, why don't you come and do a show here? Oh, okay. I'd love to. So I started out with Chum 15 years ago and I started doing Saturday afternoons from noon to 6, and then eventually they put me into the evenings doing the 60s at 6, 70s at 7. So I did that for, about 4.5 years until Chum shut down and went in another direction. Then I moved to Zoomer Radio.
Right. Now that's been consistent since 2009, is that right? Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. When Chum went down and I'm not on the air, I knew the program director at what was then called AM 740, and it was owned by MZ Media, Moses Neimer. But I knew the program director casually. He wasn't a good friend, but I'd met him. We chatted. So I called him, and he said, if you're calling about a gig here, we don't have any room for you. We've got everybody we need. And I said, well, can I just come down and meet with you? And he said, okay. It'll be nice to see you again. So I went down and had a coffee with him. And he explained to me, what their format was. I already knew. and who was on the air, and that there was really no available slot for me to work in. And so I left, shook his hand, and a couple of days later, I called him back. I had been doing a little segment while I was at Chum called Robbie Remembers, and I would pick a Canadian artist and do a little research, talk about the band or the artist, and play their song. And it was about a 5-minute segment. And so I called the program director back again a couple of days later and said, I have an idea. He said, well, I already told you we don't have a slot for you. And I said, yeah, I know, but just hear me out. So I went down and I said, this is what I want to do. It's about a 5-minute segment. I'll do it during the 60s at 6, which was already hosted by someone else. And I don't care if you pay me anything. Just give me the production time to do it, and I'll come in and do 2 or 3 weeks in advance and then, do more. You don't have to do anything except give me the production. And he said, okay, how can I lose? And I did that, and a month later they offered me my own slot. So I did it. I wouldn't suggest that anyone go anywhere and say, I'll work for free. But it was the only way I could get my foot in the door. And once I did, then I got a job.
Well, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised. I didn't, that's what I had hoped was going to happen, but I really didn't think it would happen that quickly. So I was lucky.
Yeah, and recently I saw as well on Facebook that you had interviewed Gordon Lightfoot.
Yeah, Gordon Lightfoot and I got to know each other way back when we started playing Le Coq Tavern on Yonge Street in the 60s. And he was playing about a block and a half away, a little place called Steele's Tavern. Second floor, held about 80 people, mainly students from Ryerson. And on our breaks, we would run up the street and listen to Gordon for a while and then run back down to do our own set. And so I got to know him pretty well, and we were pretty good friends for quite a while until the business separates you, because he's touring and I'm doing stuff, and we just didn't see each other, but we stayed in touch. Over the years, he's come by several times when I've been playing, and just as hanging out. And when he was releasing his latest studio album, which I think was about a year and a half ago now, they asked me to come and interview him for Zoomer Radio. So I did, and it was just like old home week. He and I, we don't ever run out of things to talk about. So it's kind of a nice thing to have somebody like that in your life, and someone that I respect so much as a writer and a song and a singer and a performer. The guy, he said to me, I will never retire. I'll have to drop dead on stage. That's the only way my career will end. And I believe him.
Yeah, and he has been very much a seminal artist in Canada. There's so many people that he's either mentored or influenced. And wow, what a guitar player too. Holy cow.
I know.
Yeah, really great artist. And recently I watched a documentary, is it If You Could Read My Mind, on his life and times. And that's well worth watching as well.
It really is. It's and the book that Nicholas Jennings wrote with Gordon is the closest you're ever going to get to the real story. Gordon for years had refused any offers to write a autobiography. And then finally, after Nicholas charmed him over the years, Gordon agreed to write with him this book. And he didn't leave anything out. And Nick, who is also a friend of mine, said to him before they even started, Gord, if you think you're going to smooth over some of the rough times, we're not. We're going to go into it. We're going to write everything that happened, no matter how down and dirty it is. And it's a great book. I mean, it's such a history of the music business and a history of his personal life and problems that he ran into over the years. But he's one of those artists that I think when people think of Canada, if they're thinking music, he's one of them that you think of, for sure, within the first few minutes. Maybe Rush and Gordon Lightfoot, although they would never work together. But, Rush is sold, the third most successful sold product in the world next to the Beatles and the Stones. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like you say, well, Gordon Lightfoot's name is one of the first ones that you think of when you think about Canadian artists.
For sure.
Yeah, so aside from the radio work, I know that you've been going steady with the band, again, with the exception of this global pandemic that we've got going on. But at a certain point in time, the band broke up and then you reformed in the mid-'80s. How many of the original members got back together with you?
Yeah, the original band broke up in '69. And so for the last season of the television show, I had another band with me as the house band. And I tried to put a couple of bands together in the early '70s that just didn't seem like it didn't click. We were working, but it wasn't the same. I was so used to, the guys that I worked with. And the reason it happened was, they had their own lives and they were getting married and having kids and doing other things in the business. And they didn't want to be on the road anymore, which I understand 100%. So eventually, by the late 1970s, I had sort of stopped, but only for a short time, because the original bass player from the Disciples approached me and said, look, we need to get this back together. So that's what we did. And since 1982, there hasn't been a time that I haven't played other than since last March.
Right. I understand that you've been mostly playing festivals and corporate events, etc. Have you pretty well stopped playing in the bars altogether?
No, we still do. There are two bars that we do in Toronto, and they're Sunday afternoons. So it's perfect for our crowd, at the age that we all are, because they can come at 4:30 or 5 o'clock and we're finished at 8 or 8:30, and they're home in bed by 9:30. So it's like a Sunday afternoon matinee, and we do one club one week and another club at the other end of the city another week. And we've been doing that for, 13, 14 years.
Well, that's the way to do it. I know that the road was one of the things that almost ended my musical career.
Yeah.
It's not
well,
so
you know
easy.
what it's like. So, it's fun for a while, but then after that, it's just, you never have time off because you're traveling and then setting up your gear at the next place, and it just becomes so repetitious, and you're not really getting anywhere. You might be, working and making a little bit of money, but you're not getting anywhere.
That's true. I know that one of the artists that I've interviewed recently was told at a certain point by one of his band members that, we got to stop playing the bars because the only thing that comes out of playing the bars is a liver transplant.
How true. Yeah.
Well, Robbie, I don't have any more questions for you. It's been a great interview so far. What I do like to do is to give my guests the last word on the show. So if there's anything that you really feel passionate about that you'd like to say to the people, this is the time.
Well, I guess I can speak to anyone who is musically talented especially in Canada, because that's my home. Live your dream. When I was a kid and I wanted to get into music, I didn't have the support of my parents or family. In fact, quite the opposite. And that was true of 90% of the people that I knew. It was like, get a real job, don't do this. Well, I believe that if you really focus and image yourself and see where you want to go and work for it. You can't sit around in your basement waiting for somebody to discover you, although that has happened. You have to get out and do it. You have to go out and play. You have to write. You have to really focus on your music. And a lot of young musicians who I see today, or I have been able to see over the years, I tell them the same thing. And a lot of them are disappointed because they're not working all the time. Well, that's the nature of the business until you reach a certain point. But follow your dream, and it'll come true. And that's basically all I have to say about that.
Very sage advice. Just one more thing. Where can people catch your radio show?
We are on Zoomer Radio in Toronto, so it's zoomerradio.ca. And I'm on 6 nights a week at 6 p.m. till 10 p.m., doing the 60s at 6, 70s at 7, 80s at 8, and then I mix it up at 9 o'clock and play anything and everything from all decades of rock and roll.
Very nice. Well, sir, it has been my pleasure to speak with you today. I started doing this podcast when the pandemic hit because we needed to do something for fun, and thanks to you, sir, this has been another fun one. So until such a time as guys like you and I can get together face-to-face over coffee or beer and tell a few lies, whatever, I will say thank you so much and cheers.
Thank you so much, and you take care.
Well, there you have it. Robbie Lane, another awesome interview. Hey, don't forget to check out his radio show 6 nights a week on Zoomer Radio. You can look him up online and check it out 6 nights a week. So, without further ado, here is Robbie Lane and the Disciples from 1964 with their hit on Hawk Records, Fannie Mae. Please enjoy. Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including research, guest acquisition, etc. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends was written, recorded by Tommy Solo with a little help from my friends in the Night Crew, all rights reserved. And hey, if you like the podcast, why don't you subscribe at Google, Apple Music, etc. Until next time, cheers.